Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. In my mind, the biggest storyline that we have nationally in college football coming out of week one was what this USC defense can be in 2024. And this has been a storyline that we've talked about a lot in the middle of the summer in terms of, hey, what does this USC team look like and how do we talk about this USC team if Coach Lynn can come in year one and turn around this USC defense? And we had a lot of national media analysts get up in front of cameras and microphones and kind of say, hey, Dan Lynn, he might be able to figure it out, but it's going to take a couple of years. And I think we kind of had this conversation in the summer saying, hey, why are we doubting Coach Lynn turning it around in year one when he did the exact same thing at UCLA 12 months ago? He took over a UCLA defense that was not very good, made him one of the best defenses in the country. He comes into USC, arguably a more talented defensive roster than what he had at UCLA. Why can't he do the same thing at USC? And from one game in, again, it's only one game, but it was against one of, if not the best offense in the country. We certainly saw that for Dan Lynn in USC. Want to get into a couple of things that we saw from Coach Lynn in this USC defense, dive into a little bit of the film, but want to talk about three really big things. One, the mentality and culture of this USC defense, I think, has flipped on its head. Number two, the personnel usage. And then number three, dive into a little bit of the schematics of what we saw. Now, before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the USC fans. It was a blast recapping this game Sunday night. It's been a blast talking this program really all summer long, and the amount of support y'all have continued to show, it means the absolute world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, I know damn well that the USC fans have watched this game back multiple times since Sunday night. Would love to hear your biggest takeaways on the defensive side of the football. We're going to get into Miller Moss on Thursday afternoon, but we're going to focus on the defense right now. And without further ado, I think where I want to start is the culture and mentality that we saw this USC defense take on. It was different, and you could tell it was different really from the first quarter. This team was flying around to the football. They were playing extremely physical, but I think most importantly, it was gap sound and discipline. And what has Dan Lynn and Lincoln Riley preached pretty much all offseason? We want to be physical. We want to be disciplined. That is exactly what we saw against LSU Sunday night. And I think one of the more fascinating storylines about this USC performance is that this LSU offense, it's really good. Garrett Nussmeier played a phenomenal football game. This LSU offensive line is one of the best units in the country. They have legitimate pass catchers on the outside. I think they are coached by one of the better offensive play callers that we see in the country in Joe Sloan. I am very confident that this LSU team is going to be very competitive in the SEC, specifically on the offensive side of the football. This might be the best offense that USC will see all season. And they held them to 20 points. They showed up in the red zone. They showed up on third downs. They showed up in the big moments. That's my biggest takeaway. This wasn't like USC came out and played San Jose State and looked good. They look good against one of the best offenses that we see in the country. Now, getting into stuff outside of this, the culture and the physicality, the discipline that we saw, the personnel usage I thought was brilliant. And we talked about a guy like Eric Gentry a ton during this offseason in terms of this unicorn defensive chess piece that you have to lean into the skill sets. Alex Grinch didn't have a dang clue in terms of how to use Eric Gentry, just kind of played him as a traditional off-ball linebacker. How did Dan Lynn use Eric Gentry? In all sorts of ways. We talked a lot about walking Eric Gentry up on the line of scrimmage, having him come off the edge. We saw Eric Gentry have two, maybe even three massive plays off the edge in the run game, chasing down from the backside. And you see him in coverage. He's 6'5", extremely long arms. You saw him get his hands on some footballs over the middle of the field as well, most notably that one to Mason Taylor, who was wide open. But Eric Gentry, using that length, gets his hands on the football. Like, Eric Gentry was this guy that we knew could be a difference maker, a playmaker for this USC defense. We just never saw Alex Grinch put him in the best positions possible to be successful. That's part of being a great football coach, is looking at your personnel, looking at their skill sets and saying, hey, you're a really good football player. We got to figure out how to use you so you can best use your physical gifts that you have. I thought D'Anton Lynn did a phenomenal job with the guy like Eric Gentry. Another guy that's, I think, a really good example, Anthony Lucas. Anthony Lucas 12 months ago was getting so much buzz coming out of USC's fall camp heading into 2023. When he played, he didn't play great, but he played solid, and for some reason just wasn't really utilized. Anthony Lucas played 46 snaps for USC on the defensive side of the football. Although it's not reflected in the box score, he led this USC defense in terms of quarterback hurries. He was very good against the run, dealing with some really talented offensive tackles, getting off blocks and being active. That's a really big storyline. I mean, I think guys like Braylon Shelby and Anthony Lucas, who didn't necessarily completely flash on the film because they were going up against, again, legitimate like NFL talent in terms of that LSU offensive line. They're going to be guys that I think you see a lot of other Big Ten offensive lines. I think Anthony Lucas and Braylon Shelby can be game wreckers for this USC defense. Now, you get into some of the schematics that we saw. I want to start with changing the picture, and the one of the things you can notice just the different defensive fronts that we saw USC go to. We saw 4-man, we saw 5-man, we saw sometimes 6-man fronts. And one of the things you can do to disrupt this LSU offense, specifically the offensive line that is very good, is hey, give them a lot of different looks. Try to disrupt what they're trying to do in terms of the blocking schemes, not only in pass protection, but in the run game as well. They did a very good job of giving LSU different looks throughout this football game. This might be one of, I mean, there was a lot of really big moments for USC on defense. This one might be the most important, right? 2nd and 6, 17-3. LSU has the football early in the fourth quarter. This at a point kind of felt like USC might be falling. I wouldn't say falling apart, but definitely not in command of this football game. D'Anton Lynn needs to mix it up. What does he do on 2nd and 6? He sends pressure, gets Garrett Nussmeier hot, sends 7. I think you're playing cover 0 here. And Garrett Nussmeier wasn't expecting, obviously disguised pretty well. You get a miscommunication. Now, I think what makes this so fascinating is now on the 3rd and 6 play, less than 30 seconds after we just saw that play, we're going to load the box. We're going to put 7 guys along the line of scrimmage, and we're going to show pressure once again. We're going to show cover 1, right? We got man coverage on the outside. We got 1 safety and Achille Arnold high. And what are we going to do here? We're going to back out of it. And Garrett Nussmeier's eyes immediately go, hey, I want to attack the deeper third from this look. They're going to go cover 1. I'm going to trust my wide receivers to win vertically. Looking downfield, nothing's there. Has to check it down. And again, Kamari Ramsey might be the most important player on this USC defense. I mean, comes up and makes a beautiful open field tackle on some really good running backs here, forcing a punt. I mean, you talk about D'Anton Lynn changing the picture post-snap. You talk about D'Anton Lynn giving this LSU offense a ton of different looks in big moments and kind of coming up big. I think another really fascinating thing that D'Anton Lynn went to when the moment was the biggest. Again, you talk about big storylines in this game, 4th and goal from the 3, LSU's first drive. What does this game look like if LSU goes down and scores a touchdown on the first drive? It could have looked different. What does D'Anton Lynn decide to do? Something that we talked about a couple of days ago before this football game. Where is LSU's offensive line potentially the most vulnerable? You got 2 NFL tackles in Emory Jones and Will Campbell. You got 2 3-year starters at the guard spots. You have a new redshirt freshman, center in DJ Chester, who I think is a really good football player. Hasn't played a ton of football at the college football level yet. What does D'Anton Lynn go to 4th and goal from the 3? We're going to go A-gap blitz, and we're going to see DJ Chester just completely missing the pass protection. Free Mason Cobb. Anthony Lucas does a great job keeping that outside shoulder free. Garrett Nussmeier has nowhere to go, has to throw it away. We're getting off the field. D'Anton Lynn looked at this LSU offense and said, hey, where can we attack this LSU team where they might be most vulnerable? He did it in the biggest moments. And you got to give a massive shout out to this USC defensive line. It was by far my biggest concern heading into this football game was this LSU offensive line. Again, I think is probably the best unit that you see in the country. We had question marks about USC's depth on the defensive line. We had question marks about their physicality on the defensive line. I think the biggest storyline here, again, this was the first drive. I want to focus on Nate Clifton, kind of playing that 3-tech here. Emory Jones is going to try to hit a reach block on him. What does Nate Clifton do to Emory Jones? It just forks lift him. And we talk about all the struggles that this USC linebacker core had last year. They weren't seeing this type of look in the run game. Look at USC reestablish the defensive line. Braylon Shelby doing a phenomenal job with the kick out. Mason Cobb is free to work downhill here. This is how you want it to look. This is not what it looked like for Mason Cobb. Mason Cobb filling really physically. And then what do you have? Eric Gentry coming off the edge from the backside, making a tackle for a loss on 1st and goal. ending up, and LSU ends up taking 0 points in this red zone trip. We said red zone was going to be important. That's when USC needs to play their best football. They certainly did that on Sunday night. We didn't see this kind of thing. You go back to this play again. Again, Nate Clifton, extremely physical at the point of attack. Braylon Shelby, physical. Mason Cobb coming in, filling physically. And then Eric Gentry coming from the backside, making a play. That's how you want it to look for USC. We knew the talent was there. We just needed it to be executed a little bit better. We needed a defensive coordinator that leaned in to the skill set of USC a little bit more. That's exactly what we got. Really, really impressed from this USC team. And again, if USC plays like this on defense throughout the 2024 season and Miller Moss continues to do what he did on the offensive side of the football, this USC team is going to be a very tough out for every team in the Big Ten. We'll dive into Miller Moss on Thursday. I think we're going to do it Thursday afternoon. Got to watch the game back a couple more times. Obviously, Miller Moss had a really good game as well. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later.